One river, that is all it took. On the 10th of January, 49 BC, Julius Caesar stood on the northern bank of a small river in northern Italy called the Rubicon. Behind him, his battle-hardened legion, 13 years of conquest, and the most successful military career in Roman history. In front of him, Rome, and a law, an ironclad, non-negotiable Roman law, that said no general could cross this river with his army, ever, under any circumstances. The penalty for crossing: death, immediate declaration of enemy of the state, civil war. Caesar looked at the river, he looked at his army. He thought about it for approximately as long as it takes to order a coffee, and then he crossed. In one moment, one decision, one step across a river that you could wade through in 5 minutes. Caesar ended the Roman Republic that had stood for 500 years and set in motion a chain of events that would create the Roman Empire, reshape the entire Western world, and echo through history for the next 2,000 years. But here is the thing. Nobody tells you about Caesar. The Rubicon crossing wasn't even close to the most insane thing he ever did. This is a man who was kidnapped by pirates as a young man, spent 5 weeks joking around with them, promised to come back and crucify them all, was released, immediately raised a fleet, hunted them down, and crucified every single one of them. Exactly as promised. This is a man who conquered all of Gaul, modern-day France and Belgium, in 8 years with an army that was consistently outnumbered, wrote a best-selling book about it while he was doing it, and used the resulting fame and money to take over the most powerful government in the Western world. This is a man who got stabbed 23 times by his closest friends on the floor of the Senate, and somehow still managed to shape the next 2 millennia of human civilization from beyond the grave. The month of July is named after him. The word Caesar became the title for Roman emperors, then German Kaisers, then Russian Tsars. When you say crossing the Rubicon, you are quoting him. When you get a C-section, you are referencing a legend about his birth. 2,000 years later, this man is still everywhere. But before we get into the pirates, the conquest, the betrayal, and the assassination that changed everything, welcome to Sketchy Past. Fast history. Zero fluff. Absolute chaos. If you've been watching this channel and you haven't subscribed yet, this is the moment. Hit subscribe, ring the bell, join the Sketchy Empire. We've been building toward Caesar for weeks, and I promise you, he does not disappoint. Let's go. Julius Caesar was born on the 12th of July, 100 BC, into a patrician Roman family, the gens Julia, that claimed descent from the goddess Venus through Aeneas, the legendary Trojan hero. This sounds like exactly the kind of thing a Roman aristocrat would claim. And it is. Whether Caesar actually believed it or simply found it politically useful is a question historians have debated for 2,000 years. What is clear is that Caesar grew up understanding power, how it worked, how it was obtained, and how easily it could be taken away. Rome in the late Republic was not a stable place. The political system that had governed Rome for 5 centuries was straining under pressures. It hadn't been designed to handle the corruption of the Senate, the military power of individual generals, the massive inequality between the wealthy elite and the urban poor, the question of what to do with the vast territories Rome had conquered. 2 reformers, the brothers Gracchus, had been murdered by the Senate for trying to address these problems. Civil war had already racked Rome once, when the general Sulla marched his army on the city and made himself dictator. Caesar was a teenager when Sulla seized power, and the experience apparently made an impression that lasted his entire life. Sulla, while reorganizing Roman politics to his liking, produced a list of enemies and political opponents who were to be killed, a process called proscription. Caesar's name appeared on an early version of this list. The reason: Caesar had married Cornelia, the daughter of one of Sulla's political enemies, and refused to divorce her when Sulla demanded it. Caesar was 19 years old. He was being told by the dictator of Rome to divorce his wife or face death. He said no. His family connections eventually got him removed from the list, but Sulla reportedly said of the young Caesar, and this quote has been passed down through ancient sources, that there were many Mariuses in him, meaning this kid has the same dangerous populist energy as the general who almost destroyed Rome a generation ago. Watch him, Sulla was right. He just didn't live long enough to see it. After Sulla's death, Caesar began the traditional Roman political career: military service, legal work, a series of increasingly important political offices. He was, by all accounts, extraordinarily gifted at all of it. His legal speeches were considered some of the finest of his era. His military service showed consistent competence and personal courage. He was charismatic, eloquent, and possessed of a social intelligence that made him genuinely liked by people across Rome's sharp class divisions: the aristocracy, the military, the urban poor, and the business class all found something to like in Caesar. He was also, by his mid-30s, catastrophically in debt. Roman political life required money, enormous sums for games, feasts, building projects, bribes, and the various forms of public generosity that bought political support. Caesar spent with a freedom that alarmed even his supporters. By the time he was in his late 30s, his debts were so large that his creditors physically blocked him from leaving Rome to take up a provincial posting until his financial backer, the enormously wealthy Marcus Licinius Crassus, guaranteed the debts. This financial desperation is important context for everything that followed. Caesar needed money. Conquest provided money. The connection between Caesar's political ambitions and his military campaigns was, at its base, partly just an extremely aggressive debt repayment strategy. Before the Gallic Wars, before the Rubicon, before any of the events that made Caesar historically famous, there is a story from his youth that tells you more about the man than almost anything else. In approximately 75 BC, Caesar, then in his mid-20s, was sailing across the Aegean Sea when his ship was captured by Cilician pirates. This was not uncommon in the ancient Mediterranean. Piracy was a serious problem that Rome had not yet addressed effectively, and the Cilician pirates were particularly well organized and aggressive. The pirates demanded a ransom of 20 talents of silver for Caesar's release. Caesar was reportedly offended, not by the kidnapping, by the amount. He told the pirates that he was worth at least 50 talents, and that they should ask for more. The pirates, apparently amused by this, agreed to the higher ransom and sent men to collect it from Caesar's associates. This took approximately 5 weeks. During those 5 weeks, Caesar treated his captivity as a social opportunity. He exercised with the pirates. He recited poetry to them. He gave speeches. He told them jokes. When he wanted to sleep and they were being noisy, he told them to be quiet. When he wrote poems and speeches that he was proud of, he read them aloud to the pirates and called them illiterate barbarians if they didn't applaud enthusiastically enough. He also, repeatedly, cheerfully, and apparently without a trace of self-consciousness, told them that after his ransom was paid and he was released, he was going to come back and crucify every single one of them. The pirates found this hilarious. They assumed he was joking. He was not joking. The ransom was paid. Caesar was released. He immediately traveled to the nearest city. Miletus raised a small fleet of ships entirely on his own authority, and at his own expense, sailed back to where the pirates had been operating, found them, captured them, and crucified them all. He did make one small concession to the relationships he'd built during his captivity. He had their throats cut before crucifixion, so they'd be dead before they went up on the crosses. A mercy by the standards of the time. This story is almost too perfect as a character study. The arrogance, telling your kidnappers they've undervalued you. The social ease, spending 5 weeks joking around with pirates, as if it were a slightly unusual dinner party. The complete seriousness behind the jokes. He promised crucifixion and delivered crucifixion with absolute precision. The personal initiative, not waiting for Roman authority to handle it, just doing it himself. That combination, charm, audacity, absolute follow, through, and a complete inability to be intimidated by any situation, is Caesar in a single anecdote. Everything he did for the rest of his life operated on the same basic template. By 59 BC, Caesar had fought his way up the Roman political ladder to become consul, the highest elected office in the Republic, roughly equivalent to being co-president for a year. He'd done it through a combination of political brilliance, strategic alliances, enormous debt, financed populism, and a controversial three-way political alliance with Crassus and the general Pompey that Romans called the First Triumvirate, which ancient wags immediately nicknamed the Three-Headed Monster. After his consulship, Caesar arranged to be appointed governor of Gaul, the Roman province covering northern Italy and southern France, for 5 years. This came with command of several legions, and, crucially, the legal immunity from prosecution that came with holding a military command. Caesar needed this immunity badly. His consulship had been controversial enough that his enemies were preparing legal cases the moment he became a private citizen again. As long as he held military command, he was untouchable. He also needed money, a lot of it. And Gaul, the vast unconquered territory north of the Roman province, covering modern France, Belgium, and parts of Germany and Switzerland, represented an opportunity. What followed over the next 8 years, from 58 to 50 BC, was one of the most extraordinary military campaigns in ancient history, and also, in terms of human cost, one of the most catastrophic events in the history of what is now Western Europe. Caesar conquered all of Gaul, the entire thing, an area roughly twice the size of modern France, containing dozens of tribes and millions of people, all of whom had been living outside Roman control and had no particular interest in being conquered. The military details are remarkable. Caesar's genius was speed and flexibility. He could move his army faster than enemies expected, adapt tactics in real time, and maintain initiative in a way that kept enemies perpetually off balance. He built a bridge across the Rhine River in 10 days, a structure that Roman engineers said would normally take months, crossed into Germanic territory to demonstrate that Rome could strike anywhere, then dismantled the bridge and withdrew. Pure psychological warfare. He invaded Britain twice, not with any intention of permanent conquest. Britain was too far, too wet, and not obviously worth the resources, but because crossing the ocean was the kind of dramatic gesture that played enormously well back in Rome, where Caesar's political reputation was being constantly managed from a distance. His siege of Alesia in 52 BC was an engineering masterpiece that military historians still study. Facing the unified Gallic resistance under the brilliant chieftain Vercingetorix, Caesar built an 11-mile ring of fortifications around the hilltop city, then built a second ring of fortifications facing outward to protect his besieging army from a Gallic relief force. He was simultaneously besieging Alesia and defending against an army attacking from outside. And he won both battles at once. Vercingetorix surrendered. Caesar kept him alive for 6 years, displayed him at his triumph in Rome, and then had him executed. Ancient warfare was not sentimental. The human cost of the Gallic wars was staggering. Ancient sources, including Caesar's own accounts, suggest that over the course of the 8-year campaign, roughly 1 million Gauls were killed, and another million enslaved. Modern historians debate these numbers. Ancient sources are notoriously unreliable on casualty figures, but the scale of devastation was clearly enormous. The population of Gaul was permanently reduced. Entire tribes disappeared from the historical record. Caesar wrote about all of this in Commentari de Bello Gallico, his account of the Gallic Wars, in clean, elegant Latin that was used as a language textbook for centuries afterward. "All Gaul is divided into 3 parts" is probably the most famous opening line in Latin literature. And Caesar wrote it about a war he was fighting while he was fighting it, dispatching chapters to Rome as a political document designed to build his public reputation. He was simultaneously conquering France and managing his public image. The man did not have an idle moment. By 50 BC, Caesar's position had become politically impossible in a specific and dangerous way. His 5-year Gallic command had been extended, but it was now ending. His political enemies in the Senate, led primarily by Pompey, his former ally, who had drifted into the conservative senatorial faction, were demanding that Caesar disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen before being allowed to stand for the consulship again. Caesar's enemies wanted this for an obvious reason. The moment he was a private citizen, they could prosecute him. The legal cases that had been piling up since his consulship 10 years earlier were waiting. If he gave up his army and came to Rome without protection, he was politically and possibly literally dead. Caesar's position: he would disband his army if and only if Pompey simultaneously disbanded his own armies in Spain. If both sides disarmed together, fine. If only Caesar disarmed, he was walking into a trap. The Senate, dominated by Caesar's enemies, refused this compromise. They passed a decree declaring Caesar a public enemy if he didn't disband his army by a specific date. Caesar was at his headquarters in northern Gaul near the Rubicon River, the legal boundary between his province and Italy proper. Under Roman law, crossing the Rubicon with an army was treason. It was the act that formally started a civil war. He spent the evening before the crossing having dinner with friends, excusing himself, getting into a carriage, and personally scouting the road to the river with a small escort. He arrived at the Rubicon in the middle of the night. Ancient sources give us various versions of what happened next, the most famous involving Caesar seeing a vision or hearing a supernatural sign that pushed him forward. What all the sources agree on is that Caesar stood at the river, understood completely what crossing it meant, and said words that have echoed through history ever since. Alia iacta est. The die is cast. He crossed. The speed of what followed was pure Caesar. He had 1 legion at the Rubicon. He moved so fast that city after city in northern Italy surrendered without resistance, before they even had time to organize defenses. Pompey and the Senate fled Rome in panic. They had expected Caesar to be slow, to negotiate, to give them time to prepare. Caesar was in Rome within 2 months of crossing the Rubicon. He took the treasury, which Pompey had fled without emptying, in such a panic that there hadn't been time, and used it to pay his soldiers and fund the campaign that followed. The civil war lasted 4 years. It took Caesar to Spain, Greece, Egypt, North Africa, and back to Rome. He won every engagement that mattered. Pompey was defeated at the Battle of Pharsalus in Greece in 48 BC, a battle where Caesar was outnumbered nearly 2-1 and won anyway, and fled to Egypt, where he was assassinated on the beach by agents of the Egyptian pharaoh before Caesar even arrived. Caesar reportedly wept when he was presented with Pompey's severed head, whether from genuine grief at the death of a man he'd once been close to, or from anger that he'd been denied the chance to show clemency, or simply as a political performance, is impossible to know. He turned away from the head. He accepted Pompey's signet ring. He moved on. Caesar arrived in Egypt in 48 BC chasing Pompey, and found himself in the middle of a dynastic civil war between Ptolemy XIII and his older sister Cleopatra VII, who had been driven out of Alexandria and was technically in exile. Cleopatra, who was 21 years old, had herself smuggled into the palace rolled inside a carpet, or according to some sources, a laundry sack, to get past her brother's guards and meet Caesar privately. Whether the carpet story is literally true or a later embellishment, the outcome is historical fact. Caesar met Cleopatra, became her ally, helped her defeat her brother and regain the Egyptian throne, and began a relationship with her that lasted until his death and produced a son, Caesarion, Little Caesar, whose existence and legitimacy would become politically explosive in the years after Caesar's assassination. Caesar spent several months in Egypt, longer than strictly necessary for political purposes, and the relationship with Cleopatra was apparently genuine on both sides. He was 52, she was 21. She was also, by all accounts, one of the most intellectually formidable people he'd ever encountered. Fluent in 9 languages, deeply educated in mathematics, philosophy, and statecraft, and possessed of the kind of political intelligence that had allowed her to survive and thrive in one of the most dangerous royal courts in the ancient world. Caesar returned to Rome in 46 BC after a campaign in North Africa that eliminated the last major senatorial resistance. He celebrated 4 triumphs, the Roman Victory Celebration Parade, in a single month. The celebrations lasted for days. The amount of wealth paraded through Rome from his conquests was staggering. The Senate, either out of genuine gratitude or political survival instinct, named Caesar dictator, initially for 10 years. Then, in early 44 BC, dictator perpetuo, dictator in perpetuity for life, with no end date. This was, constitutionally speaking, the effective end of the Roman Republic. The Republic's systems, the elections, the term limits, the distribution of power between consuls and senate, all still formally existed, but a dictator for life was a king in everything but name, and everyone knew it. Caesar also did something that enraged the conservative senatorial class. He sat down when the Senate came to present him with honors. Tradition required standing. Caesar sat. Whether this was a deliberate insult, a moment of arrogance, or, as Caesar's allies claimed afterward, the result of a sudden attack of an epileptic condition he apparently suffered from, the symbolism was devastating. The senators had come to honor him, and he'd received them as a king receives subjects. He was also seen, at a public festival, with a crown placed on his head by his ally Mark Antony. Caesar removed it, and had it sent to the temple of Jupiter, a politically savvy move that let him reject the crown publicly. But he'd been seen with it on his head, and the image stuck. The question of whether Caesar wanted to be king was debated in his lifetime, and has been debated ever since. What is clear is that his behavior made it impossible for his enemies not to believe he did. By early 44 BC, a conspiracy had formed around two men, Marcus Junius Brutus and Gaius Cassius Longinus. Brutus was the ideologically important one. He came from a family with a legendary republican history. An ancestor named Lucius Junius Brutus had been one of the founders of the Republic itself, the man who expelled the last Roman king 5 centuries earlier. For Brutus, killing Caesar wasn't personal. It was the defense of an idea, the idea that Rome should be governed by laws and institutions, not by one man's will. Cassius was the organizer, personally aggrieved, politically ambitious, and practical enough to understand that ideology alone wouldn't get the job done. He recruited the conspirators, planned the logistics, and pushed Brutus to commit when Brutus wavered. There were 23 of them. Senators, former allies, men Caesar had pardoned after the Civil War. Men who owed their careers to him. They called themselves the Liberators. The Liberators. The date was set for the 15th of March, 44 BC. The Ides of March. Caesar was scheduled to attend a Senate meeting and would be leaving Rome the following day to begin a military campaign in the east. If it wasn't now, it would be too late. Caesar had been warned. A seer had told him to beware the Ides of March. His wife Calpurnia had nightmares and begged him not to go. There were last-minute warnings from multiple people, including allegedly a note pressed into his hand as he entered the Senate building, which he never read because he planned to read it inside. He went anyway. He was Caesar. He was dictator for life. He was the most powerful man in the Roman world, surrounded by friends and allies, entering a building full of senators. He walked into the theater of Pompey. The Senate was meeting there because their regular meeting place was under renovation, and took his seat. The conspirators gathered around him, supposedly to present a petition. One of them grabbed his toga and pulled it down from his shoulder, the signal. The first stab came from Casca, who hit Caesar in the neck. Caesar grabbed Casca's arm. He tried to stand. The rest came forward, 23 men stabbing in a crowd, many of them hitting each other in the chaos. Caesar fell at the base of Pompey's statue, which stood in the theater. Ancient sources note this with the kind of dark irony that history occasionally delivers without prompting. The man who had defeated Pompey, driven him from Rome, pursued him to Egypt, died at the feet of his enemy's statue. The ancient sources give his last words as the famous "Et tu, Brute," addressed to Brutus. Shakespeare made this immortal. Whether Caesar actually said it, or said something like it, or simply looked at Brutus in a way that was later interpreted as those words, is impossible to verify. What the ancient sources do agree on is that when Caesar saw Brutus among the conspirators, he pulled his toga over his face and stopped fighting. He was stabbed 23 times. The subsequent autopsy, performed by a physician named Antistius, possibly the first recorded forensic autopsy in history, determined that only one wound had been fatal. The liberators had imagined that killing Caesar would restore the Republic. The Senate would resume control. The old order would return. Rome would breathe again. What actually happened was the opposite of everything they planned. The Roman people, who had genuinely loved Caesar, were enraged. The conspirators fled Rome within days. Caesar's lieutenant Mark Antony delivered a funeral oration over Caesar's body that whipped the crowd into such fury that they burned the conspirators' houses. Caesar's will revealed that he had left money to every Roman citizen, a final act of populist generosity from beyond the grave. And his adopted heir, a 19-year-old great-nephew named Gaius Octavius, who took the name Caesar and is known to history as Augustus, spent the next 13 years fighting the civil wars that followed the assassination, defeated Antony and Cleopatra, and became the first Roman emperor. The republic that the liberators had died to protect was gone. The empire that Caesar had made inevitable arrived with Augustus, and it lasted for another 500 years in the west and 1500 in the east. The conspirators achieved the exact opposite of their goal. They killed the man and made him immortal. They tried to save the republic and guaranteed the empire. They stabbed Caesar 23 times and couldn't kill his legacy. July is still named after him. The word Caesar is still a title for power in half a dozen languages. 2,000 years later, when you cross a point of no return, you are still crossing the Rubicon. He won. He just wasn't alive to see it. That was Julius Caesar, the man who was kidnapped by pirates and crucified them as promised, conquered all of France while writing a best-selling book about it, crossed one small river and ended 500 years of Republican government, got stabbed 23 times by his friends on the Senate floor, and still managed to shape the next 2,000 years of Western civilization from beyond the grave. If this video hit you the way it should, if you are sitting there realizing that everything you thought you knew about Caesar was just the surface, like this video right now, it costs you nothing and it tells the algorithm that this channel deserves to be seen. Subscribe to Sketchy Past if you haven't already. Ring that bell. We are 6 videos in, and the momentum is real. You've seen the numbers climbing, the CTR breaking through, and we are just getting started. Next episode, Napoleon Bonaparte, the man who conquered most of Europe, got exiled twice, came back from the first exile with an army he recruited by walking up to soldiers alone and saying, "Shoot me or follow me," and lost everything in 100 days. Also, was he actually short? The answer is more interesting than you think. Stay sketchy. See you in the next one.